Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Between Two Layers. I'm Carly Riley. Joining me back in the saddle, we have Robbie Ferguson, co-founder and president of Immutable. Robbie, we made it. We made it to 2023.
Exactly. It's been a long year, but I'm honestly feeling more energized than ever. So really excited to share the wrap-ups and learnings we've had from this year and also what's in store for 2024.
We have a very special episode today, as Robbie is alluding to there. We've got our year in review, and then we've got our year ahead, looking back at everything that's happened in 2023, both at Immutable, in the broader market, and then looking ahead, we're going to have some familiar faces popping in to share their predictions, and of course, we'll be getting Robbie's predictions for 2024. Before we dive into all that good stuff, however, if you have been enjoying this content, please do subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, leave a like. We really do appreciate all of your engagement and enthusiasm. Let's dive into it. Robbie, let's just start high level. Give us a little context here, like 2022, comparing that with 2023. Set us up for this.
So I think the biggest two differences, apart from some reasonable market differences, obviously, is 2022, we had a couple of things happen. First, you had the market transition from hysteria and bull market into a full bear market. And interestingly enough, we did not see a ton of game developers fall off or stop being inflows into Web3 gaming. What we did see is the demand or desire to create fungible tokens, the demand to create primary sales reduced massively as the speculative volume was less important than building long-term sustainable economies of games, which is what we're always fundamentally focused on anyway. I think we saw a tremendous shift in the types of game developers building in Web3, particularly in the latter half of last year and the majority of 23 as well. And that big shift was early on, the majority of people building games were crypto native developers who were building games. Now you have a lot of Web2 studios building with Web3. And I think that's much easier than the other way around. I think you get lots of really interesting on-chain games and on-chain experiments with Web3 native teams, but they won't necessarily be blockbuster or massive mobile games with the experience of scaling them to tens or hundreds of millions of users. They're a different type of game. We've obviously seen this resurgence of a reasonable percentage of games looking at fully on-chain gaming at the end of 2023 as well. I think we had a huge period of consolidation and probably healthy reduction in leverage in 2023 as well. You had FTX get wrapped up, and it looks like people will get at least a good chunk of those deposits back. So I think that was very much the right process, and it's good to have that chapter of crypto's history behind us. Hopefully there's not too many of those in the future. And it looks like people are getting 65 cents for the deposit. That's what it's trading on secondaries right now.
Yeah, I think
more right now.
I end up seeing people seeing more, at least in dollar terms. I think in crypto terms, it's
I've heard the strongest reason it's going down is crypto pilled people think the opportunity cost of not buying ETH right now is so much higher.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, people who lost their crypto, it was $16,000 at the time of the FTX collapse. It's now $44,000. So I know a lot of folks who are like, I don't want my $16,000 back. I want my Bitcoin back,
And obviously the most interesting trend in 2023 has been in the last 6 weeks. You can call it whatever you want. There has been a huge idiosyncratic outperformance of gaming investments and gaming tokens. And we don't just see this in what's happening on market. We see this in what is happening in early stage gaming deals, teams that could not raise 2 months ago, or that were slowly able to raise. And typically people were able to raise this year just not in a week or 2 weeks, like in the peak markets of before. But now they're getting those deals done much faster. The deal flow we've seen from our team is 5 or 10x in literally the last 6 weeks in gaming. And it's interesting because I think the market overall is not that heated. And so it's I almost think it's very clear that the next bull run is going to be driven by this thesis of gaming. The next 100 million users is going to come from games in Web3, and it's going to triple Web3's user base overnight. And people are almost realizing that's where it's going to be and front running or accelerating that outperformance in gaming right now. So it's a very interesting trend. I think what it will do is We'll see slightly more interest from Web 2 studios, but they've already been engaging. They'll continue to engage. Some of them may try and create more tokens, more early sales. But really what it's also doing is a tremendous amount more of startups and indie studios attempting to build Web 3 games right now, which is exceptional. We're really excited to welcome these guys on board. I think our numbers over the last, I think I saw like 6 deals won today in the last 2 days in our wins channel. So really the pace of how we're onboarding games is accelerating too. But I'll get into that next. Look, I think it's been a really good year. People have been able to build, which I actually love their markets. They're my favorite markets because in bull markets, you cannot think. The level of external value and noise is just so high relative to internals. And we've been really able to keep, and I'm not calling, any kind of bull market. I'm not on here to wave a magic wand around markets. I think anyone who says that they know is lying, because the best people in the world are right 60% of the time. So we don't know that it could do anything next hour or next month. What I do know is there's going to be mainstream games going live with 10 million users over the next 12 months. And those will start to redefine how players own in-game items. And that's what we've been about since day one.
Well, obviously, you've been alluding to some of the Immutable news that we want to talk about. You also mentioned just consolidation that's happened in this space. I think that's something that's been striking to me, is just seeing it in terms of the various Immutable partnerships. It feels like there's been a consolidation, and it's just really impressive to see where y'all as a company are coming out of 2023 in terms of the prowess you hold in the gaming space, in Web3, everything you're working on, what you're delivering from a product standpoint, from a partnership standpoint. So why don't you take us back? Like, let's look at this past year, 2023, for Immutable, and like walk us through how we've ended up here, how this happened.
Absolutely. I think you can't ignore the sort of very significant partnership we did with Polygon at the start of the year. And just to recap the context on that, Delphi Digital, I don't know if we can show the image somehow, released that research last year around estimating the market share for Web3 games by looking at the funding for each game on each blockchain or platform. And obviously, we have to use leading metrics like these, since even today, 97% of Web3 games that are building are not yet live. These are taking time, and roughly half of them are going live in 2024. And at the end of last year, Polygon and Immutable combined had roughly $1 billion each, and total 2/3 of all gaming investments in the space. So roughly 35% market share each. And it was very much a 2-horse race. We basically sat down and said, well, look, how do we form a partnership that can really simplify the choice for game developers and make this much easier for people to build and help everyone be as successful as possible without having to spend countless weeks thinking about what part of the protocol or scaling layer of the stack do I use? What part of the platform layer of the stack do I use? What do I use for my wallet? What do I use for my payment on ramps and off ramps? These are not decisions that developers in Web 2 have to make beyond whether they use Unity or Unreal. And we want to make sure that we are simplifying as much as possible for the Web 3 industry. And since that partnership, we've seen effectively our win rate has gone from 36% to close to 70% average competitive win rate for the year. So when we know where a deal goes to competitors, we're winning close to 70% of the time. We have jumped from, I think, roughly 90 to 100 games in November last year to well over 220 highly funded games today. And our testnet essentially develop it. So people who are applying self-service to build on the platform, we don't have the capacity to talk to, since we're mostly focusing on these bigger games, has jumped to more than 12,000. Not all of those are individual games, but a good chunk of them are. And our barbell strategy as a company is we want people to be able to build crypto natively with smart contracts on Immutable zkVM, which literally you'll be able to do within weeks with the launch of Immutable zkVM in beta at the end of this month. But the other thing is you can build using APIs and SDKs that are in Unity, that are Unreal, because our thesis is, as this market explodes, your traditional Web 2 developer will not want to learn smart contract security paradigms like reentrancy bugs. They're not going to want to learn new languages. They're not going to want to learn how you write smart contracts, or even how you should develop economies from scratch. They just want to build games that are better for players, have a great business model, and are highly sustainable. And that means they want to build with a Stripe-like set of APIs, which is what we built with Immutable. So this is really our approach, and it means we can have huge games build, games like Aglet, who initially we didn't even know they were building because they just started building on us self-service. So that's how our architecture is built from that perspective. We then just recently announced, as you know, the Merit Circle partnership, which is really another one of these major forms of strategic partnerships where we can simplify the choice for game developers. Merit Circle is the largest Web3 gaming DAO in the world. They have $100 million cash treasury. They have a much larger native treasury. And they are incredibly experienced in building products for games. So I think it's pretty clear it's very tough to compete with Immutable Polygon in market if you're trying to bring them onto your own sort of protocol. But if you're working with us, we can massively reduce costs, and the opportunities for you to build with every single one of the games on our platform today is enormous. And so I think that's another step where we're reducing costs for games, we're reducing costs for players, and we're helping everything get to market faster. And of course, we had the G7 DAO market research come out this year as well, which basically said, this trend of market dominance has continued. We've seen 65 migrations according to that report, and 56 of those were to Polygon Immutable. And so we're really seeing not only just new games onboarded, but also a lot of other games choosing to come build on Immutable. So I'm incredibly excited by the pipeline today. I think we're going to be announcing a very large number of games over the next 3 months. Roughly half of our pipeline is actually unannounced, even as of today, which didn't reflect in some of those G7 numbers. So look, the thing I'm most excited about is launch of Immutable ZKVM and these games going live. We have games like Alluvium with 2 million people on the wait list, which just launched on the Epic Store. We have games like Guild of Guardians with day 1 and day 7 retentions of 67% and 46%, way beyond world class, even with the golden cohort halo effect. We're going to see games with 1 million or 10 million daily active users. Already Immutable has 750,000 daily active users as they transition into a full Web3 on Immutable. So this is what I'm most excited about over the next 3-6 months.
One thing that we haven't totally talked about on this show yet, but I think is interesting, especially as we look at how the Immutable approach has played out so far in 2023 this year, and obviously as we look ahead, is, we hear a lot about grants that are given out by different chains, companies, and, I know Immutable takes a slightly different approach to things. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what y'all have done and how that's panned out.
Yeah, obviously we work with the foundation that issues IMX, and our approach is very different to most because we don't view these as funding. This is not, hey, you get X tokens and you get to sell them on market and then go with your game. Really, for us, it's long-term incentive alignment. And in order to protect the value of those, every single grant that we write is effectively nearly completely underwritten. And the games love it. And the way these work is when you get a grant, you get some small amount for announcing, but then most of it is releasing the game and then achieving volume milestones in the protocol. And the reason this is so significant is right now, I think across 180 million tokens allocated out of the 1.1 billion from the foundation that is earmarked for ecosystem development. In order for those to be earned, $12 billion in protocol volume has to be achieved. And to put that in context, it's $250 million in protocol fees of the 2%, which makes the gross fees of the platform a top 5 protocol in the world. And the reason this is so significant is games love it because they know that they can be successful. And ultimately, they know the value of these are being protected rather than being given out just in a year or 2 years. And second of all, it means that we can go for much heavier incentive alignment, but make sure that the value of each of these is protected. So I think that's actually a very unique thing. It makes it a lot harder for us to onboard games. We're not necessarily always, we're very rarely the highest payer in terms of our recommendations. But what we do have is a product that has much stronger product market fit, a great go-to-market team, and something by default they want to use. And so I think this is actually a really significant point, and it means that this supply will be incredibly efficiently allocated to market, essentially to winners, as they prove far more value to other users of the protocol as they essentially have successful games. So I wanted to touch on that. I think it's very important.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, like I said, it's not something we've actually talked about a lot on the show, you and I, but I really appreciate hearing your thinking and how y'all think that through. You touched on some of the big partnerships that obviously y'all have embarked on this year, Merit Circle, Polygon, but there's been others. I mean, you've onboarded some big folks. You've got Ubisoft in there, you've got AWS. Maybe touch a little bit on those partnerships and as we talk about 2023 for Immutable.
Absolutely. I mean, Ubisoft, obviously, we're really excited to bring on one of the largest games companies in the world to create a frictionless experience for Web3 gamers. We will be showing more details on the precise nature of this, but we will be working very closely with that team. And that was a deal I think took close to 8-9 months to put together. So, I mean, this is, I think, where the professionalism of our go-to-market team really helps. Unlike a lot of other teams in the space, we're really focusing on how do we completely understand the technical requirements of what you're trying to build? How do we understand what the user experience requirements are? We have a full business development team and solutions engineering team and partner success team. We have a huge ecosystem team now that is connecting you to everyone from investors, if you want it. I think we have a network of more than 50 aligned investors in Immutable. We have people who can help market your game. We can help essentially with any part of the game design or economics process, because we're building this internally. And this is what our vision is for how we can provide support to these games. And all of those muscles are required to onboard some of these giant game studios, because they want to make sure that that brand will be protected. They can't afford any security incidents. And this is where I think the choices we've made, although they've been hard, for instance, going with ZK early meant we had an app-specific roll-up rather than smart contract capabilities. Now, obviously, we're fixing that and sort of being able to target the whole suite. But these are trade-offs we've made because we were never happy to compromise on things like security. And second, obviously, AWS, we're actually working really closely with that team, not just on automated credits for games building on Immutable, but also in terms of deal flow and lead gen. So that's actually been a really productive partnership. I want to make sure when we announce these partnerships, they're not just empty. And everyone we've announced this year has actually been extremely meaningful. I mean, if you have a look at the Polygon partnership, just to go back to it, I think initially the message to the market, it's a hard one to grok, but that has doubled our market share. It has massively reduced complexity for game developers. And I think we'll see the same type of results with this Merit Circle partnership. So look, I think it's been a fantastic year. I think it's been our best year so far. There is a lot more to be done as we get these games live. But I think it's going to be a very busy next 2-3 months.
And before we get to predictions, I mean, we'd be remiss to talk about Immutable in 2023 and not talk about Immutable, the core product, and of course the various rollouts you've had this year, whether it's Passport, obviously touching on ZK EVM. I mean, there's been so much that you've built on the product side. I would love to just wrap up this section by hearing you talk a little bit about that and what you think the big gains have been on that side.
So Passport, we took from not existing, just being, a glimmer in the eye of the engineering team. Well, it was actually in development, but it wasn't in production, to successfully going into testnet, to having more than 2 million people signed up to it today. And this is a completely unique product because it is the only product where you can have non-custodial ownership, but you can use the same funds on any game, and you can have invisible signing. So we really see this as the trifecta, which is, non-custodial ownership, the ability to have shared liquidity between deposits, which and invisible signing. And traditionally, there's a trade-off, especially between these bottom two, because the majority of the way that other wallets accomplish invisible signing, which is essential to a good gaming experience, is by giving elevated privileges to the game in order for them to sign on the user's behalf. The problem, of course, is if you have funds in for other games, then that game can sign on. Illuvium can be signing for Gods Unchained, which makes zero sense. What we've built is a co-signatory system where Immutable Guardian acts as a heuristic that both permissions the level of value that game can trade on your behalf and also silos it to just being their own game, which means you can have a completely invisible user experience. Currently, this converts 600% better than alternatives, your typical MetaMask, etc. But more importantly, when you join Passport, you get access to 2 million users. You get access to the deposits or sales of every single other game on the Immutable network. And that's actually our fundamental product strategy, to resolve liquidity fragmentation, which in my opinion is the most difficult problem in Web3 to solve. And it's also the least serviced. And it's the most valuable one, because if you can resolve fragmentation between marketplaces, fragmentation between rollups, you've already solved two of the key problems in Web3 today, which is someone might want to sell an asset inside of a game and buy it on a marketplace, say a Merit Circle or a GameStop or a Magic Eden, and they can't because the liquidity is locked to just the venue in which they're listed. And of course, this links into our global order book, where we're creating this unified network of marketplaces so they can maximize their volume, they can take fees, but most importantly, we can enforce protocols we can enforce royalties at the protocol level. And what this means is you can't be pseudo swapped, you can't be X2Y2, you can't have this race to the bottom or with Blur where fees are going to nothing. And I'm not throwing shade on any of those projects. That's the game theory or strategies that those have decided. But what I do think is absolutely essential is people must have enforceable royalties. Otherwise, what we are building has very limited utility, because the future of a lot of monetization in game design is going to be these games can make money through secondary sales, which is totally aligned with the end player. Then you can have user-generated content and users earning fees on what they're creating. And now they can do it irrespective of the marketplace they're trading on with maximum liquidity. Our global order book is already doubling volumes because more than half of our trades are listed in one venue and bought in the other. So I'm really, really excited for this product to mature as more and more games go live. Immutable ZKVM, we just completed mainnet regenesis internally. We've done testnet regenesis and had that live for a few months. This will be going into beta at the end of this month. Games will be able to start building in the production environment, and we're gearing up to our main launch with many games in March of next year. But you'll be able to build fully in production before then.
So exciting.
Super exciting. And we have 13,000, I just got the numbers, 13,000 game developers signed up to Immutable Hub this year, which is our platform that anyone can sign up and start developing by themselves. And our vision here is we actually want to create a complete GUI experience. So you should never have to even touch code to be able to create your economy. But right now you can do it without ever touching a smart contract. And so I'm really, really proud of what our experience for Web2 developers has come to this year as well, at the same time as we have this barbell strategy of you can go as crypto native as you want, you can go as on-chain as you want with the Immutable ZKVM. And finally, of course, Checkout, which is our payments product. So you can pay in any currency. It will automatically know, are you an L1 user? Do you need to deposit to L2? Are you an L2 user? Do you have neither? And you should be depositing with credit card. We just partnered with Transact on this to have rollouts across pricing 170 cryptocurrencies for automated payments, which will be swapped under the hood. And our vision here is basically you can come with any set of initial profile. You can be an L1 or L2 user. You can be a Web2 user, and we will know the fastest way to convert that user for games. This is what Apple Pay did in terms of maximizing conversion and the iOS store. It was massive for games revenues. We want to build the same thing for Web3 games.
Well, and of course, speaking of games, we have talked to so many amazing games that are building on Immutable this year. We're going to be hearing from many of those games, hearing some of their predictions for 2024. But let's talk a little bit about games on Immutable. Give us the rundown on what 2023 has looked like when it comes to games on Immutable.
So, I mean, we've seen a ton. We've seen people like Illuvium, who over the last 15 months have done $100 million in sales, go from strength to strength. They just launched on the Epic Store. I think I'm about to battle Kieran at some point today, which I'm terrified about. We had Cross the Ages top the chart in Australia and France for strategy games, sold out their Season 2 pack set, millions of NFTs. We have God's Unchained go live on Amazon Prime Gaming. We had Guild of Guardians playtest results break essentially world-class retention stats for day 1 and day 7. Next up is our testing in Canada, which is a very high spend audience, very similar to the US, to see the CAC and day 30 goals as we head toward a mainnet launch. And then we have literally, I think, hundreds of games that I'm excited to see over the next couple of years, but in particular, the 130 highly funded ones we onboarded in the last 12 months. We have a ton of really exciting stuff. Things like Arcbound, Shardbound, Blade of God, Galactico Manager. I mean, I've got a huge list. I can't go through everything. But we will see a lot going live in March to April of next year as Immutable ZKVM goes live, and then continuing on to the end of the year. So stay tuned. We also entered into Korea and Japan, and Asia will be one of the major markets we focus on over the next 12 months. So we have 5 people on the ground in Korea and 4 people on the ground, I believe, in Japan right now. And we've, not only onboarded massive games, but we're talking to some of the biggest game developers over there at the moment. I think we just got listed on BitBank, the third Japanese exchange. So we're greenlisted in Japan, and it'll be very easy for future listings there. And obviously on Upbit as well in Korea earlier this year. So I think Korea is probably the most advanced market for Web3 gaming. You have in Japan huge regulatory green lights, government support for Web3 gaming. You see kind of MENA coming into gaming, and there's a couple of hundred games building in mainland China that are doing so pretty discreetly, but with goals of publishing via Web3 to a global audience. So this is very much something that is not going away. We're going to see the numbers of games explode. I think I saw Steam's number of games per year after launch, and it's really interesting to look at the exponential number of how many games they're shipping per year. And I think the requirements for that is category adoption, but more importantly, a platform where you can build incredibly easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're teeing us up very well, speaking of what's coming up in 2024, into part 2 of today's episode, which is the prediction side of things. We've talked about what's happened in 2023. Now let's get into what can we expect, or what do you expect, and some of our partners and friends expect for 2024. All right, Robbie, our first prediction comes courtesy of Justin Hulog, Chief Studio Officer at Immutable. Let's hear what Justin had to say.
I predict that next year, we're going to see a game that has 100,000 monthly active buyers, which roughly translates to 1 million users. My personal prediction is that it's going to be us with Guild of Guardians or Shardbound or Metalcore. But at the same time, so many great developers have been making so many great games that we're going to see one of those big hits finally come.
All right, Robbie, you just heard Justin's prediction. He's saying a big breakout game comes next year, probably from Immutable, but he says there's a lot of great games out there. And he said specifically the way he defines that is 100,000 monthly active buyers, which to his mind translates to about 1 million active users for a game next year. This year, I'm saying next year, but this year. What do you think, Robbie? Is he overshooting the mark? Do you think it could happen? Where do you land?
No, totally. Look, I've shared these predictions as well. And the reason we use monthly active buyers is that's what we care about internally, because it's just not the overall players. It's how many of those players are engaging in the value proposition of trading. Otherwise, it's the same as just releasing an ordinary Web2 game. And from data, we know that the conversion from being a player of a game to being a trader of the real assets based on the game can be anywhere from 1% for a casual game up to north of 50% for games that are fundamentally driven around skin trading, like trading card games, or even Counter-Strike Go often actually has traders which exceed the player base because people are so obsessed with the metagame of trading. So I think this is completely achievable. 2024 is the year where more than half of the well-funded games are actually going live. So I think we're going to see hits. There'll be a very high failure rate, but we will certainly achieve these objectives. And I think it's going to drive another wave of investment as people build confidence in the models.
All right, Justin, you've got an endorsement here from Robbie, and exciting, I think, for the ecosystem as a whole. Our next prediction comes from Daniel Paez, who is the executive producer of Gods Unchained. Let's hear what Daniel from the Immutable team has to say.
Oh, my predictions for the next year, Web3 gaming. I think you see a lot of studios being able to fund themselves with their own tokens, as opposed to submitting themselves to the mercy of publishers that take huge cuts. And I think we're going to see that second wave of seasoned developers start jumping into Web3. I think the silver lining with all the layoffs in the game industry, now you have a lot of really good game developers who might want to just start their own studio. And I think the cryptosphere and the blockchain space offer them that opportunity to do so. So yeah, it's an exciting 12 months ahead. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to playing a lot of different games.
Awesome. So we have Daniel there saying more gaming companies funding themselves through tokens and these Web3 mechanisms, as opposed to just relying on the traditional models, and that all these layoffs we're seeing in the gaming world driving more people into the arms of Web3. What do you think, Robbie?
I totally agree with this. I think this is very uncontroversial given what we've seen in the last few months, which is a huge bull run in early stage gaming investments. We see probably 10 times the amount of deals getting closed in early stage Web3 games. And that's typically at valuations sub 50 million. And we haven't seen the valuations climb, I think, too aggressively yet, but the pace of deals getting done has certainly increased. And I think it's totally right. If you're a game developer looking to found a studio, one of the easiest places you're going to find funding is if you're building in Web3 gaming, particularly if you have a token, because the liquidity is extremely attractive for investors. So I think I totally agree on the funding side. And I think we're also seeing this influx of indie studio devs as well. I think we saw that in the last bull run when you had successful tokens, which incentivized people to come build. And now we're seeing this again. So again, thumbs up from me. I think this has already proven to be true over the last few months.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it may be counterintuitive to some folks when they read headlines. I know Unity just announced another round, 25% layoffs or something at the beginning of this year. I could see people thinking like, oh, that's bad for gaming in general. It's not good for anyone. But Web3 gaming is still a bit in a category of its own, as it's really growing and thriving.
The crypto market is totally decorrelated from broader tech right now, for sure. I think you're seeing probably overall net increase in hiring in crypto when you're not necessarily seeing that. In fact, it's a pretty tough market for engineers and tech in general at the moment. And then the other thing to remember as context is just 2021 and COVID was such an intense hiring period for all tech companies that many of these companies doing layoffs they are net 30, 50% bulked than what they were prior to this phase. So a lot of it is just them trying to optimize the teams for their current budget and current revenues in a post-COVID world. It's not necessarily this is a net reduction in the overall industry.
Yep, makes sense. All right, let's get to our next prediction. I thought this one was interesting. This comes from Chris Clay, another Immutable friend. He is the VP of Game Design and Creative at Immutable, and he is the game director of both Gods Unchained and Guild of Guardians. Had to read it for that one. That is a mouthful title. All right, let's hear from Chris.
As we go into 2024, I think we're going to start seeing an inflection change from a lot of what Web3 has been during my time here, which focused a lot on early mints. Essentially, high value, low volume mints, I think, have been something that has dominated the industry as a whole. And I think that's a transition that we're likely to see in 2024. Away from a focus on the majority of NFTs in the Web3 ecosystem being part of pre-mints. But as we go into 2024 and we see more games launching, I do think that we're going to see more NFTs that have been minted by players of games in the games themselves as part of standard game playing activity. And that will change the nature of things.
I thought this was an interesting one, really speaking in my mind almost to this paradigm shift within the Web3 ecosystem where tokens and even NFTs have felt more like Kickstarters for companies. And here he's treating them more like a product that's a part of a company, a part of a game. I liked this prediction. I don't know, Robbie, what's your take?
I think I sort of agree and sort of disagree.
Okay.
So I agree with the broad trend, which is that we're getting real games and the vast majority of volume is going to be dominated by real in-game utility spent. People trading because there's 10 million players and this is fundamental to how the economy operates. But I think that as that emerges, at the same time, there will always be whales who want to spend money on pre-sales, who want to spend money, trying to get in the ground floor. And if there's opportunity to be made based on the market, which there absolutely is, people will be doing these. We've even seen hugely successful mints over the last couple of weeks as forms of early revenue generation or funding, which I think is great. I have nothing against that as long as you have to base it. There actually is a fundamental economy utility. I think with the resurgence of the gaming market, you're going to see this mints though. Absolutely.
It was interesting to me to listen to Daniel's prediction than Chris's prediction, because I feel like Daniel is actually speaking a little bit more to still that Kickstarter model to some degree. And then you had Chris taking
I would just
counter
there's
position.
fundable tokens, which is 100% on. Yeah, exactly. So I think the VC model of, hey, we're going to have a token model for our game. It's going to have some utility, and we're going to do a round is absolutely the easiest way to get funding right now. In fact, I think it's 3 or 4 times easier to get funding with a token than it is equity if you're early stage. And certainly there's no market for equity without token warrants if you're planning on doing a token.
Interesting. All right. Our final prediction from friend of Immutable, friend of Between Two Layers, Scott Herman. He is the co-founder and VP of strategic partnerships at WAGMI Games. He, like some of the other folks we've heard from, was on the Between Two Layers podcast last year. Let's hear from Scott.
Where I see the market going in 2024 is that we are about to enter the biggest bull run that crypto has ever seen. And Web3 games are going to lead the charge. In fact, by the end of 2024, it's probably just going to be gaming. The words Web3 shouldn't even exist in that vocabulary, especially if we want mass adoption. I also see interoperability becoming very big in 2024 as well. A lot of games are getting to the point to where they're globally launched and they're going to be able to start working with each other. Some people want to say metaverse. I don't think we're there quite yet. Interoperability is step one. And as a creator myself, what I also see happening is that mass adoption is going to be spearheaded by creators currently playing games on YouTube and Twitch right now, kick.com, right?
All right, Robbie, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with this. He is incredibly bullish in 2024, thinks that this is going to be a great year for crypto in general. I will say, credit to Scott. He did record this late last year, so it was before we had officially gotten the Bitcoin ETF approval and everything that's sort of been kicked off by that. The second point there is really about interoperability being having a big year. And he says, don't necessarily use the word metaverse. But we will get rid of the phrase Web3 in gaming. It'll get to just be gaming. And then finally, that creators will have a big role in all of this when it comes to, streaming on Twitch and YouTube and getting more awareness for games. Attack whatever part of that you want to in terms of what you think.
So, totally agree with, I think we're going to have a bull run driven by more users using Web3 than every other application or protocol combined, because of gaming. I think that is unequivocally true given the level of funding into consumer-facing applications, which really stands out. I think the reason why gaming is such a unique category in crypto is the majority of the funding into other categories is going into infrastructure. And that's necessary, but it's not going to be what attracts eyeballs. All of this funding is going directly into content that is designed to bring in eyeballs. And so the ratio of, funds to users from gaming versus any other category in Web3 is superior. And the second thing is, I don't necessarily think interoperability will be the dominant characteristic of 2024. And that's because I think it's a more complex business model. It requires a lot more things to go right for it to be successful. And I don't think it's necessary for a successful Web3 game. To me, the core of a successful Web3 game is how do you give players ownership of assets that they otherwise don't own. The easiest example is players are already spending $15 billion trading Counter-Strike Go assets every year, spending $150 billion plus on in-game items. Let's give them ownership of that. To add on interoperability is just another difficulty layer. And so I think just from a pure logic perspective, we should expect to see hits, but whether or not they will be driven by interoperability, I think that's a more long-term thesis that's going to emerge with long-term incentives. And I think we're actually yet to work out the business model that will necessarily drive a lot of that. Is it going to be like an airline alliance model where people are subsidizing costs of sharing audiences by having their assets work in an aligned ecosystem of games? Is it going to be a form of everyone vampire attacking each other because you can use your content in this game, and that's how they're porting users over? Is it going to be a single publisher ecosystem driving audiences between old games and new games? Who knows? Or is it full third-party incentives, go crazy with Roblox-style gaming incentives where anyone can build a model or a user-based content engine, and they can take clips on the things that they build or that people build on that platform, in which case interoperability is, core to that. And that's something I'm quite bullish on, actually, is like the Roblox or Minecraft plus Web3.
I was going to say, what do you think about dropping the Web3 terminology altogether and people just embracing this as gaming? Do you think that happens in 2024 or maybe later?
Yeah, I think that is important. So I think it's important, particularly in the West, where there's a brand attached to Web3 that is not always positive in gamers' minds. Gamers are a very skeptical audience. What I would say, the clearest example of this is we have a few games that are almost going for mainstream appeal. And the way in which they're doing that doesn't require interacting Web3, certainly in the first, 90% of using the game before you're actually engaging in any payments. I think the easiest way for a game to go mainstream is to not mention Web3 at all. And people can, obviously find out if they want, but what they're experiencing is the value proposition of trading. So I don't disagree with that. How things will end up who knows if brands can change like that. As soon as you have one game which proves out this model of actually this is way better for creators on a mainstream, mass appealing level, maybe it inverts it for a certain audience, and maybe people are really happy to talk about it. Obviously, within the crypto sphere, people love talking about what characteristics, innovations in Web3 is it actually using. It's a pro, not a con. My personal view is, over time, this is going to be subsumed by the category of just gaming, and it's just going to become horizontal.
Yeah, I don't think we lose the Web3 piece, at least this year. I mean, we still, sure, we consider mobile gaming, but we'll still categorize it that way. Like, you still want to categorize things in various ways. And so,
but what do you think about free-to-play gamers? Free-to-play would be a good question. Most people wouldn't really often demarcate between the two. I mean, it would still be there as a classification. It's not invisible. But you would typically just think of that's the standard by which most games are.
Was free-to-play in the beginning, in the early days of free-to-play, was it exclusively referred to as free-to-play gaming?
For sure, because it was quite unusual. And in fact, there was a big backlash against free-to-play in the beginnings.
I remember Zynga getting booed at some awards, some gaming awards, something or other, because Zynga was seen as
to some extent, I think gamers are they just have an attitude towards, if it's a new form of monetization, it's designed to extract more value. And that's what's so radical about Web3, but that's also the brand challenge that we have to jump.
Yeah, absolutely. And then did you speak to the last piece here is the role of creators in helping games go mainstream, Web3 games?
Absolutely. No, this is totally right. I think the story that we're giving people is a very human story, which is you can now get value out of the countless hours and money you are spending when you have these stories of people earning something that's worth $1,000. It's those things that go viral. You remember back in the day, when people would unbox the one-of-a-kind trading card in God's Unchained, and there was the stories emerge. There was a guy who was able to fix his roof in his house because of the value he sold it for. I think it's those human stories which really change the brand and sell people on the value proposition of this stuff. That's all going to be embodied by influencers and by YouTubers. And we're certainly not strapped for cash on the distribution side. So I think there's going to be massive budgets for scaling these games in 2024. Speaking of, I know Guild of Guardians just launched in Canada, right? So I think a lot of the phasing will be, so the Guild of Guardians, we're doing a launch in a very high spend, high acquisition audience, but without Web3, just to see what the retention is. And then we're doing a global rollout with Web3.
Oh,
so
that's
I think we'll see more of
interesting.
that practice this year as well. Yeah, which is very customary for games, right? You wouldn't ever press go on a global launch. You would always be testing in a regional audience. You'd be optimizing the game's retention and making sure, hey, this is ready to receive jet fuel performance marketing and do a big global launch.
Yeah, but you're saying abstracting away the Web3 piece initially just to make sure the core gameplay mechanisms are working well.
Precisely. So exactly. We think about it as like the early retention should often just be dictated by the game's quality. Later retention, metagame ecosystems should be much more around the Web3 side, but we just want to make sure we have the game fundamentally really optimized and capable of being successful independently, and then we supercharge with Web3.
Yeah, very interesting. So thank you to everyone who participated for their great predictions. And now, the moment folks have been waiting for, Robbie's predictions for 2024. Robbie, take it away. What do you see happening this year?
So first off, I'll start with probably the most important prediction, which is I think Web3 gaming will fundamentally prove its model as incontrovertible. And, in the words of Van Eck, a breakout blockchain game will finally arrive. I actually think there'll be anywhere between 2 to 5 hits this year, mainly starting from sort of end of Q2 in terms of timing. Certainly the most confidence we have is from our own portfolio. Now, I think there's going to be a very high failure rate. This is why we invest in not just a fundamental quality bar, but also sheer number of games that are able to have shots at being winners. I think the amount of high quality, high confidence winners we have is probably, close to 50 to 100 games going over the next year. So we're going to see multiple hits come out of that pile. I mean, there's more than 250 games on the platform today. So I think we'll see multiple, not only in the space, but on Immutable, which is incredibly exciting. My second prediction is off the back of that, just as we saw, God's Unchained or any significant hit in Web3 gaming catalyze a huge wave of investment and a huge rush of developers trying to come in and capitalize on this market. I think we're going to see the amount of developers building in Web3 3 to 5x as soon as you have this hit. And that will be from indie developers, but also major studios will suddenly realize we need to rush with urgency now to build a successful model here so we know what this future looks like. Third prediction, gaming tokens will become the most popular way to fund games, and we'll see a ton of early stage investments. We've just started operating Inevitable Gaming, the Immutable Polygon Gaming Fund. We've started making our first investments, and we're already seeing the pace of deal flow and deal investment probably 5 to 10x compared to 3 to 4 months ago. So certainly early stage gaming is massively taken off already. Fourth, I think we're going to see ZK rollups, particularly EVM compatible ZK rollups, become enshrined as the default scaling long-term roadmap. I think particularly with EIP 4844 and proto dank charting, where we have Ethereum augmenting a lot of this, we're going to see the ultimate end game of scaling infrastructure become a very clear stack. And this will commoditize as more and more people come to the table. But I think we'll see early leaders like Polygon sort of creating the best infrastructure here early on. And certainly this will be the expectation for developers, is you can have security as well as full smart contract compatibility with EVM, which I think has the most network effects out of any virtual machine, and Solidity has the most network effects out of any programming language on the blockchain right now. Fifth, I think we'll see a ton of grifts. We've already seen yield farming disguised under new brands come back. It comes back every time with bull runs, and I wouldn't even say we're in a full bull run really from a macro perspective, maybe slightly for gaming. But we will see many, many grifters come out of the sideworks, and I think that's why it's so important. We have companies focused obsessively on how do we actually deliver product to millions of people that change their lives and that prove the value of this technology. Coinbase has done so much good for the space by relentlessly focusing on compliance, on utility, on better product experiences for centralized exchanges. We now need to see these applications come out. And that's why I'm so excited about gaming, because it's such a concrete use case with such a concrete value proposition. I think that's all we can do, really, apart from regulating the space, which is not really in our control for producing these grifts. And it comes with the territory. We've just got to make sure we're outweighing them with real product innovation.
I love it. Robbie, thank you so much, as always, for your thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you have enjoyed this, please do subscribe, shoot a comment, a like, tweet at us at Immutable. We love hearing your thoughts. And with that, have a great rest of your week, folks.